Chapter 35. Treadon Nelson. Treadon read the last direction off Jaren's phone. Turn left on Green Street. The office should be a few buildings down, he said. He pointed to a 2-story stucco building with a street address on the door, but no business sign. Jaren swerved across the lane to get into the parking lot, cutting off a purple minivan. He received an angry honk for his trouble. He pulled into a badly finished parking lot and drove to the far side with an empty space on either side of his car. "You know this car is indestructible, right?" Treadon said. "You could park in the middle of the street, and it would probably be sitting pristine in the middle of a 20-car pileup. Just because it doesn't scratch doesn't mean I want people bashing their doors into my baby." Jaren got a thoughtful look on his face. "I still haven't seen what happens when I turn the security system up to level 10. Maybe I should park closer to someone." "Seriously? You'd test your car's security system on unsuspecting foster parents?" "You were the one who complained where I parked." "Let's go." Treadon exaggerated speed walking to get across the entire parking lot faster. Despite the jokes, Treadon felt an increasing urgency to find Ellie, to know that she was safe, even if that meant knowing she didn't want to see him again. They stepped inside the front doors. He heard a buzzing. He reached for his phone, but his back pocket was empty. "I left my phone in your car," Treadon groaned. "Do you want to go back for it?" Jaren shifted from foot to foot. Treadon could read his impatience. Jaren had his own worries with his dad, but Treadon was grateful he'd come. "Forget it," Treadon said. "I want to see if we can learn anything here. I'll check my messages when we're done." On the second floor, they found the door labeled Los Angeles County Field Office. The door opened toward them right as Jaren reached for the handle. An exhausted-looking man in a suit escorted 2 young children with a hand on each of their backs, a boy with bangs covering his eyes, and the other, a girl with brown curls. Each carried a black garbage bag held tight against their chest. Treadon could read a feeling of fear, of confusion. He thought of Ellie, unsure of what the future held for her. He squeezed the door handle too tight as he held the door open for the trio. Jaren followed him into a large room, divided into offices by temporary walls that were solid on the bottom, top half made of glass. Ahead of him, down the hallway created by the office dividers, stood a tall counter with 2 attendants staring at computers. One attendant was a middle-aged man, his hair slicked back against his head. He had a long nose and a weak chin. The other was an older woman wearing bifocals. She had age spots up her neck, and the extra skin there hung in tandem with the chain holding her bifocals in place. Treadon approached the man and waited for him to look up. He didn't. "Excuse me, sir?" Treadon said, trying to remain as polite as possible. He could already read the stiff way the man sat, his focus on his current task, and the annoyance at having someone in front of him that he couldn't immediately guess the reason for their visit. This guy liked efficiency and very short interactions with other human beings. The man sighed and looked up. "What can I do for you?" "I'm looking for someone in your system." Treadon tried to speak slowly, but the rising anxiousness in his chest made the words come out louder than he intended. He repeated himself, softer, leaning forward. Several heads inside the office dividers swiveled to see who had raised their voice. The office was way too quiet. The tick of a clock, the brush of a file folder being shifted on a desk, every sound echoed through the room. His raised voice seemed like some kind of code violation. "I know she was in a foster home, but she's gone. The whole family is gone." "Are you next of kin?" Flat. Checklist question, like he hadn't registered the fact that a family was missing. Or he didn't care if it didn't fall under his jurisdiction. "No." "Do you have written permission from the legal guardians or foster parents to access personal records?" "No. How would I have gotten written permission if they're missing?" This time, Treadon didn't keep his voice down. "Do you have legal court papers signed by a judge?" "Please." The man softened enough to shake his head. "Has she been missing for 24 hours? At that point, you would need to call the police and file an official missing person report. I'm so sorry I can't help you here, unless you're interested in becoming a foster parent." The man lifted a stamp and slammed it down on something behind the counter. "If you'll excuse me." He picked up a pile of papers and stepped into a back room. Treadon's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. Anger raced through him, competing against the raging anxiety. He flexed his knees, ready to jump over the counter and corner the man in the back room. If civility couldn't help him find Ellie, he wasn't above threats. "My friend here loves cats." Treadon felt a hand on his arm. A squeeze. He turned a little too quickly and knocked Jaren's hand off his arm. Jaren sent him a look, a condemning and begging glance that told Treadon everything he needed to know. He should have let Jaren talk first, work his magic with people. Now they only had one option left, and the woman liked cats. I used to have a cat, Treadon said, trying to follow Jaren's lead. When I was little. It ran away. 3 short sentences. He felt like a robot. He had no idea how Jaren acted so natural under stress. I have 3, the woman said with a smile. A tabby, a hairless, and a Persian. They're all spoiled rotten, but they know who their mommy is. We're doing a report in English, Jaren said, and we're wondering if you could tell us more about the foster system. The woman leaned back and laced her fingers together. This was a subject closer to her heart than cats. There are over 60,000 children in the foster system in the state of California. There are too many children and not enough resources. Each child deserves a chance for the brightest future we can offer them. But trauma at an early age can be detrimental. They say the single most powerful factor for a child is having one trusted adult in their lives. That can make fostering a child literally life-changing. You really care about them, don't you? Treadon stepped closer. Jaren had gone quiet, stepping back and looking down at his feet. One trusted adult, something Jaren hadn't got from his mom or his dad. Of course, the woman said. Every child is important, and there is always hope for the future. I met some great kids the other day, Treadon said. I played with them, and they meant a lot to me. They had a great future. He emphasized the word had and lowered his eyes. He shook his head back and forth. The woman took the bait. Had? She leaned forward so Treadon could see her eyes over the top of her glasses. What do you mean? It looks like the family up and moved in the middle of the night, without a word, just whoosh and nothing. The strings on her glasses waggled back and forth as she shook her head. They aren't allowed to move while caring for foster children without the appropriate paperwork. We would know if they had moved. Is there a way you can make sure? I know the dad was sick. I would hate to think anything had happened to them. I can't give you any information. Treadon waved his hand. You don't have to give me any information. But if I told you their names and the address, could you confirm that they filled out the paperwork and only moved? Their house looked like something bad might have happened. That was a bit of a stretch, since the house looking mysteriously clean hardly meant something bad had happened. The woman shifted, not convinced. Please, I only want to know if they're okay. She sagged and then glanced around. What were the names of the children? Treadon thought for a second. He started with the twins, Mike and Foster Jenkins, and the names of the foster parents. Pat. Treadon thought back to the night Ellie had introduced them. He could hear her voice in his mind as clearly as if she was speaking next to him. Pat and Nolan Grayson. The woman tapped on the keyboard for a few minutes while clicking her mouse and squinting at the screen. Each click seemed to increase a shadow of concern over her face. She glanced at Treadon. When did you say you played with these kids? Last week. I saw them on Wednesday. The woman shook her head. You must be mistaken. Mike and Foster Jenkins were never placed with the Graysons, and the Graysons haven't had foster children for over a year. Treadon was shaking his head before she finished speaking. That's wrong. He leaned over the counter to try and see the screen, but she turned it away from him. He reached up and twisted his fingers into his hair. The ache in his head and the nausea from this morning returning full force. He felt dizzy and confused. This couldn't be right. Had Ellie lied? Treadon was sure he would have been able to tell. Were the records wrong? A twisting dread wound around his chest, making it hard to breathe. If someone went to all that effort to clean the house spotless, how much harder would it be to change some numbers in a computer? No, listen. There were more. There was a baby. Treadon couldn't remember the baby's name. There was a boy. His name was Jake, and he needed Ellie. He needed her. He couldn't keep the desperation from his voice. He found himself leaning too far over the counter. The woman's eyes grew large, and she leaned back in her chair, like she could get away from him. He was losing his chance. He tried to calm down. He straightened, placing his hands on the counter like anchors to hold himself back, and took a deep breath. Can you check on one more person for me? Eleanor Agarwal. Can you just let me know if she's safe? She tapped a few more keys. Treadon could see that curiosity was pulling her forward, even though she had no intention of giving him any information. I'm sorry. We have no record of Eleanor Agarwal in the system. That's impossible. This time, the anxiety and dizziness came out as anger. He slammed both fists on the counter. I was with her Wednesday. I talked to her and drove her home, and she walked in the door. The woman reached for a radio. You need to leave now. before I call security." Treadon stepped closer, ready to reach across the counter and pull the computer screen to face him. Jaren pulled him back. "Let's go," Jaren said in a low voice. "There's got to be another way." "I'm not giving up," Treadon said. "You heard her. She's as important as every other person. Maybe more. Maybe a lot more." The other attendant came back through the door with 2 uniformed officers. A commotion at the entrance made them all turn. The door slammed open, and a man in a disheveled suit dragged in a boy who was flopping and flailing wildly. Jake. His sweater sleeve was ripped, and he twisted in the man's grip, but his arms were tight to his side, his fists buried in the pocket of his sweater. "Can I get some help over here?" the man called, trying not to lose his grip on Jake's flailing form. The 2 uniformed officers glanced at Treadon and Jaren and decided that the other problem was more immediate. They quickly made their way around the desk and down the hallway. Even with 3 grown men, they struggled to get Jake through the door and into one of the partitioned offices. Treadon could see the group through the clear wall as they tried to get the boy to sit in a chair. "Now's our chance. Let's get out of here." Jaren pulled Treadon toward the exit. Treadon stumbled forward. It was Jake. Ellie's Jake. "Stop," Treadon yelled. "Stop touching him." He darted into the office and shoved one of the officers into the wall. He pulled the other man away from the boy, and the other officer turned to face Treadon. Without the pressure of the hands on him, Jake turned into a rag doll and collapsed into the chair, his head rolled back against the seat. The only movement was the quick rising and falling of his chest as he gasped for air. "He doesn't like to be touched." Treadon stepped back, hands raised. They weren't armed, but all 3 of the men looked like they were ready to tackle him to the ground. "I'm sorry, but you needed to let go of him." "What's going on?" the man with the greasy hair demanded from the hall. "The kid tried to run," said the man who dragged Jake through the door. He tucked in his shirt and straightened his tie. "The foster parents called me, and I caught him a couple blocks from their house. It's the 3rd time he's run." Treadon stepped toward Jake. "Can you hear me? Are you okay?" Jake gave no response. He continued to stare blankly at the ceiling, his head lolled back against the chair. "Buddy, Jake, can you tell me what happened? Where's your family?" Treadon leaned back, although every nerve in his body wanted to take the boy by the shoulders and shake him. Jake showed no signs of awareness. Treadon knelt next to the chair, careful to only let his fingers touch the armrest. "Jake," Treadon whispered softly, "where is Ellie?" At the sound of her name, Jake blinked for the first time. Treadon hated that he could read the emotions. Jake didn't trust him or anyone. Jake wanted to do this himself, but he couldn't. He needed help, and Treadon was the closest thing he had. Jake continued to stare at the ceiling, his lips twisting like he was fighting his own impulses. An internal wrestle warred on his face. Jake slowly pulled his arms away from his body, slipping his hands out of his pocket of his hoodie. One hand had a journal gripped so tightly that the pages were bent. The other hand was held in a tight fist. The fingers uncurled slowly to reveal a pendant. 3 different-sized circles, one inside of the other. Jake held the items out to Treadon, jaw flexed, a muscle standing out under his skin. A single tear slipped from the corner of Jake's eye and ran down his cheek.